He didn't raise his voice. He didn't make a scene. But when a quiet black businessman was asked to leave a flight for no clear reason, his next move sent a $5 billion shockwave through the entire airline industry, and no one saw it coming. It was supposed to be another quiet flight. Flight 2879 from Dallas Love Field to Portland. Late evening takeoff, 9:15 p.m. The kind of flight where the cabin lights were already dimmed, passengers already wrapped in their own little worlds, business travelers scrolling through spreadsheets, couples leaning into one another, earbuds in, eyes shut, just waiting for the sky to swallow the noise of the day. Malcolm Grant had boarded early, aisle seat 2A. He didn't need pre-boarding, didn't ask for priority access. He moved like a man used to not being noticed until it mattered. Gray charcoal suit, tailored but not loud. Smartwatch on his wrist. A worn brown leather briefcase by his feet, creased in the corners, stitched back together in places with love and time. It had followed him from Sao Paulo to Singapore and back again. Tonight, it carried a folded document labeled confidential, merger terms, a pair of reading glasses, and a single protein bar he probably wouldn't touch. Malcolm, 51, had just wrapped 3 straight days of investor meetings and strategic board sessions. He'd sat through hours of pitch decks, corrected forecasts, and pushed through decisions that would ripple across entire industries. And now, all he wanted was stillness. Home was a couple hours away, and his wife had texted a photo of his daughter curled up with a book on the living room couch, the family golden retriever snoozing next to her, paw over her ankle like a guard. That's what he was flying toward, peace. He had just powered down his phone and reached for the in-flight magazine when he saw her. A flight attendant, blonde, ponytail, red lipstick just a little too bold for the hour, walking toward him with a practiced smile that didn't touch her eyes. "Mr. Grant," she asked, tilting her head slightly. He nodded. "We're going to need you to step off the plane for a quick security check." She said it like it was nothing. Like it was routine. But the air around her was tight. Rehearsed. Malcolm looked up slowly. "Pardon?" "Just a quick procedure, sir," she said, eyes darting toward the cockpit then back again. "Shouldn't take more than a few minutes. You'll be reboard shortly." He blinked, but didn't raise his voice. "I'm sorry, did something trigger on your system?" She hesitated. Just for half a second. But that was enough. "I don't know, sir. I was just instructed to ask you to come with me." Around him, silence bloomed. Row 1 pretended not to listen. Row 3 stared out the window like it suddenly had a view. Someone in 2C shifted uncomfortably and tapped his phone just to look busy. A younger man across the aisle muttered, "That's wild," under his breath, but he didn't look up. Malcolm didn't speak. He didn't ask twice. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out his phone, 1 bar of signal, and scrolled to a single contact, Helena, Chief Strategy Officer. He tapped call. She picked up on the second ring. "Pull everything," he said. "Northwind Air. All equity, all connected subsidiaries. I want 0 trace of our money left by the time the wheels lift off that runway." "You got it," she replied. No questions. She knew the tone. The call ended. He put his phone away, nodded at the flight attendant. "Let's go." And just like that, he stood, picked up his briefcase, and walked down the aisle with measured steps. Not rushed. Not defiant. Just precise. As he passed through first class, a toddler peeked at him from their mother's lap. A man in a hoodie turned up the volume on his headphones. No one spoke. No one stood. The silence said everything. On the jet bridge, 2 uniformed security officers were waiting, not TSA, but private airport enforcement. Their stances were loose but ready, hands hovering a little too close to their belts. "Mr. Grant," the taller one said, his badge reading L. Peterson. "We just need to ask a few questions, standard protocol." Malcolm looked at them evenly. "Am I being detained?" The second officer, older, beard flecked with gray, opened his mouth to answer, But Peterson beat him to it. Not officially, sir. We just received a report of unusual behavior. Unusual behavior, Malcolm repeated, voice even. What kind? The officers exchanged a glance. We weren't given specifics, the bearded one said. We were just asked to make contact. Malcolm took out his phone again, didn't look at them. He wasn't calling a lawyer. Not yet. He didn't need to. The point had already been made. But just then, the flight attendant reappeared. She moved quicker now, nervous energy in her steps. Sir, she said, softer this time. We've spoken with the captain. You're cleared to reboard if you'd like. Malcolm didn't move. What changed? She paused. I think there was a misunderstanding. Was there? He asked, tone flat. He let the silence settle. Behind them, the boarding door remained open. The plane still waited. So did the question. Then Malcolm leaned in slightly. Not to threaten. Not to intimidate. But to make sure she heard every word. This plane will still take off, he said. You'll still serve drinks. Passengers will still land in Portland. But everything tied to this airline, its name, its funding, its partnerships, it's already falling. He looked to Officer Peterson. I'm done here. And with that, he walked back through the terminal, passing passengers lining up for other flights, none of whom knew they were witnessing the beginning of a corporate meltdown. Malcolm didn't look back. His steps were quiet, but what they carried would rattle boardrooms across the country. At Gate B5, the glow of the departure sign hummed above his head like static. Behind him, Flight 2879 was still delayed. Ahead of him, the fuse he just lit was burning fast, and no one, not a single executive in that airline's tower in Chicago, was ready for what came next. Malcolm didn't look back. As he moved down the terminal toward the Delta Sky Club, the sharp click of his shoes on the polished floor was the only sound that seemed real. Everything else, the boarding announcements, the suitcase wheels, the coffee orders, the idle chatter, faded into white noise. Gate B5 sat behind him like a closed file. A chapter finished. A fuse already lit. He didn't rush. He didn't have to. The collapse had already begun, and the people still standing inside that plane had no idea they were floating on borrowed time. At 9:27 p.m., just 12 minutes after he left his seat, the first email hit Helena's inbox. A capital withdrawal order, executed. Emergency notice, distributed to all internal funds. Secondary triggers, greenlit. The $5 billion Malcolm's firm had poured into Northwind Air and its parent companies over the past 3 years, liquidated in one call. And the thing was, Northwind had built their entire modern profile around him. Around Malcolm Grant. Around the story of partnership, shared vision, and inclusion. They had stood on stages at DEI conferences and used his name like a trophy. They had flown executives to summits and led with phrases like, "We don't just talk about equity, we live it." They'd used his photo in their brochures, his signature in pitch decks, his image beside diversity metrics they used to close investors. And now, in the silence of a man who didn't raise his voice, it was all slipping through their fingers. At 9:43 p.m., a passenger in 4C uploaded a shaky phone video to Instagram. It showed Malcolm quietly rising from his seat. No argument. No disruption. Just a brief exchange, a silent nod, and then his low, calm warning, everything tied to this airline is about to fall. The clip went viral in under an hour. The hashtags followed, #TheQuietPull, #GrantWalked, #BoardroomJustice. TikTok analysts dissected the clip in real time, calling it the cleanest corporate takedown ever filmed in an aisle seat. Reddit threads lit up, speculating on what had happened. Was it racism? A false alert? Did they know who he was? Why didn't anyone stop it? By 10:20 p.m., Ascend Holdings, the conglomerate that owned Northwind Air, closed the trading day with a sudden 6.7% dip in after-hours stock value. By midnight, it was over 9%. partner hedge funds started pulling collateral, and two major logistics subsidiaries sent queries about the situation. But Northwind still hadn't released a statement, because no one knew what to say. Inside Northwind headquarters in downtown Chicago, lights stayed on long after the janitors left. CEO Janet Corwin sat in her glass-walled office on the 34th floor, replaying the video on mute, again and again. Her assistant, Marcus, stood near the door like a soldier waiting for orders. "Do we have confirmation that he issued the pull?" she asked, not turning from the screen. "All of it," Marcus replied. "Not just his firm, he's mobilized third-party partners. Subsidiaries. Alliance funds. Every major tie. It's total." Janet leaned back in her chair, palms pressed to her face. Why didn't anyone flag this? There was no paper trail. No warning. We had him booked for a Q4 equity summit. He was supposed to keynote. And instead we walked him off a flight. "Yes, ma'am." Janet exhaled through her teeth. Jesus. But it was already too late. Because the world wasn't waiting for their version. It was watching the silence. And interpreting everything in it. Articles began dropping by dawn. The Verge called it a high-profile demonstration of financial consequence. Bloomberg wrote, Malcolm Grant's silence echoed louder than any press release. The Atlantic asked if this would set a new precedent for economic protest. But Malcolm still hadn't spoken. Not a tweet. Not a quote. Not even a statement from his firm. Just a single reshared video from a travel blogger who'd been 2 rows back, who captioned it, "He didn't even look angry. Just finished." And that's what scared them. At 7:08 a.m., Northwind's media team finally released a statement. It was vague, clinical, corporate. "We are reviewing an isolated security matter that occurred aboard Flight 2879. We regret any inconvenience experienced by our passengers and are fully cooperating with airport authorities." But the comments weren't buying it. So, no explanation? You walked off the guy who funded your expansion? This is what DEI means to you. Every hour, another blow landed. That morning, a regional paper ran a quote from a former Northwind board member who said Malcolm had been the most critical investment voice in the last 5 years. By lunchtime, 3 private investment coalitions had frozen partnerships. By 2 p.m., Northwind's legal team issued internal warnings to prepare for a breach in board confidence. Meanwhile, Malcolm was in Portland. Not with reporters. Not on social media. He was in a rented conference room with 2 of his firm's senior analysts reviewing transition plans. "Send statements to every secondary we pulled from," he said. "Let them know we're reallocating into our Clean Air Logistics Fund." And Northwind, his associate, asked. Malcolm didn't look up. "Let the market handle that. We're getting interview requests." No comment. "Are you sure?" "They're spinning stories." Malcolm finally looked up. "Let them spin. We don't need to correct what they never asked permission to distort." And that was it. That was the power of his silence. The refusal to explain. The unwillingness to soothe. Northwind had built their house on his reputation. They borrowed his name like capital, and now they were watching the market respond to what happens when the foundation quietly pulls away. Inside the company, panic spread like fire through a data center. Junior analysts fielded panicked emails. Internal Slack channels were flooded with links. Staff asked if they were about to be laid off. A few high-ranking VPs started reaching out to private PR consultants. Some even considered resigning before the next board call. Meanwhile, Malcolm's story was no longer just about one man. It had become something else entirely. On LinkedIn, Black professionals shared their own stories of being profiled on flights, in lobbies, and boardrooms. One post read, "You ever walk into a room you helped build and still get treated like you don't belong?" Malcolm Grant didn't just walk away, he showed them what it costs to ignore presence. It was being taught in classrooms. Quoted in newsletters. referenced in financial ethics webinars. They called him the quiet man who pulled the floor out. And Northwind? They were still falling. With every passing hour, the silence was a little louder. And the world kept listening. By the time Northwind's stock dipped past 11%, the silence had become the headline. A quiet man detonated $1 billion empire, read one financial blog. The boardroom just met the bottom floor, said another. But Malcolm Grant still hadn't said a word. No video, no tweet, no podcast appearance. And that, more than anything, was what terrified them. At Northwind headquarters, CEO Janet Corwin hadn't slept. She'd spent the last 10 hours fielding investor calls, crisis management briefings, and a board that had gone from trusting her instincts to demanding her resignation in real time. But none of it compared to the single call she still hadn't made. The one that mattered. Malcolm Grant's number sat on her phone screen like a loaded gun. She hovered over it more than once, each time pausing, each time backing out. But by the next morning, with legal breathing down her neck and PR drafting public apologies they knew wouldn't land, she finally pressed call. It rang twice. Then he answered. Malcolm. Her voice was thin, raw, like someone who hadn't just lost control of a company, but of the story itself. It's Janet. There was a pause on the other end. Then a quiet, measured, I know. She took a breath. I want to start by saying I'm sorry. Deeply. What happened on that flight should never have happened. Not to you. Not to anyone. Silence. We've already suspended the crew pending investigation. We're reviewing security protocols and fast-tracking new DEI audits. You think this is about audits? Malcolm's voice was calm. But it landed like a hammer. This isn't a checklist problem, Janet. This is a credibility problem. And yours is gone. She closed her eyes. Malcolm, please. We can fix this. Fix it, he repeated, slow and surgical. Let me ask you something. How do you fix being treated like a stranger in a space you helped build? She didn't answer. Because there wasn't one. He continued, voice low but deliberate. I spent years lending my name to your comeback. I helped you restructure. I endorsed your expansion. I walked your CEO tour with you. And the moment there was a sliver of discomfort, your system treated me like a threat. Not a partner. Not a person. A problem to remove quietly before takeoff. Her throat tightened. I didn't know, but someone did, he cut in. And you built a company where that was enough. Then help us change it, she said, desperate now. Let's sit down. Let me release a statement. Public apology. Restitution. We'll rebuild this from the inside, Janet. His tone flattened. I didn't do this for revenge. I did this for visibility. There are thousands of people who get walked off flights, out of boardrooms, out of job interviews, and they don't have $5 billion behind their name. I made sure this time, someone had to look. She swallowed hard. Then what do you want? Another pause. Then he said it, quiet but unshakable, I want the truth. Public. And I want it from you. You want me to take responsibility? No. I want you to tell the world that your house was built on borrowed credibility. And now, the foundation walked out. Janet stood from her desk, pacing. That would destroy us. Then maybe it should. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His restraint cut sharper than rage. You don't get to use presence as a press tool and then treat it like a liability at boarding time. She exhaled. Let me post something. Post it for them, he replied. Not for me. What do I say? Start with the truth. And he ended the call. No threats. No pressuring. Just a closed door and the echo of what accountability really sounds like. That afternoon, Janet walked into a boardroom lined with exhausted faces and presented the only path forward. We're not defending, she said. We're admitting we failed to live up to the image we sold. And we owe people more than polished silence. One board member objected, citing legal exposure. Another warned of investor backlash. But the tide had already turned. Public pressure was building. Comment sections were flooded. Former employees were coming forward with stories that echoed the same theme: polished culture, performative equity, and a quiet rot underneath. That night, Northwind Air's official X, formerly Twitter, account published the statement. Not a deflection. Not legalese. It began simply: we failed to protect the people who built our foundation. One of them showed us what happens when silence finally speaks. The post went viral in minutes. It included a full admission, confirmation of Malcolm Grant's withdrawal, and a promise to restructure leadership around real accountability, not optics. But by then, Malcolm was already ahead of them. At 7:12 p.m., his firm uploaded a 2-minute voice recording titled, "To Those Tired of Being Doubted." There was no video. No music. Just his voice. Clear. Steady. And direct. I wasn't removed from that plane because of what I did. I was removed because of who they assumed I was. That's a reality too many of us carry every day, in airports, offices, conference rooms. We walk through doors we helped open and still get treated like we don't belong inside. So this wasn't about one flight. It was about drawing a line. Not for me, but for the next person. The next time. His voice dipped, just slightly, but with weight. Power isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's a phone call, followed by silence. And a silence so complete, it forces everyone else to speak. The clip ended. No outro. No call to action. Just truth, left in the air like vapor. By the next morning, the story was everywhere. Good Morning America ran a segment titled, "The Quiet Power Move Heard Around Wall Street." Harvard Business Review dissected it as a case study in ethical leverage. On YouTube, dozens of creators called him the man who ended a company without saying a word. But Malcolm didn't appear on any of them. He didn't bask in the attention. He didn't correct the takes. He didn't lean into celebrity. Because it had never been about spotlight. It was about setting precedent. And now that it had been set, he didn't need to raise his voice to keep it standing. In the weeks that followed, Northwind's board replaced Janet Corwin. A new interim CEO was installed. Several VPs stepped down. Flight crews were retrained. Protocols restructured. But for the people watching, the real shift wasn't corporate. It was cultural. Across social media, Black professionals, frequent travelers, and underrepresented leaders began sharing stories that had once felt too small to matter. Now, they saw them as part of a bigger truth. A truth Malcolm had delivered without shouting, without staging, without permission. Quiet. Firm. Unapologetic. In a quiet park in Portland, Malcolm sat alone on a bench. No cameras. No crowd. Just him and his thoughts, watching the light fade over the trees. His assistant had texted earlier, "The internet wants a follow-up. Everyone's asking what comes next." He didn't respond. Not yet. Because this story wasn't about what came next. It was about what had already happened. A man boarded a flight. Was treated like a threat. Chose not to argue. And made a phone call that shattered the illusion of inclusivity built on borrowed names and silent compliance. His silence spoke. And now, everyone else was still trying to catch up to the echo it left behind. As the author of this story, I want to take a moment to speak directly to you, the listener, the reader, the one who stayed with Malcolm Grant until the final word. Because while this story centers on one man's quiet act of power, its message reaches far beyond corporate boardrooms and airport jet bridges. We live in a world where too often, perception outweighs truth. Where people are judged by the color of their skin before a word leaves their mouth. Where institutions talk about diversity until it becomes uncomfortable. What happened to Malcolm wasn't loud. It wasn't violent. It didn't involve shouting or breaking things. But it was devastating in its familiarity. A successful black man, who'd helped build the very company that tried to push him out, was quietly removed, without explanation, under the guise of protocol. And yet, instead of reacting with rage or demanding recognition, he made one call. And let silence speak. The lesson is this: sometimes the most powerful protest isn't the one shouted in the streets, but the one carried out with dignity, strategy, and clarity. Malcolm didn't argue for a seat on that flight. He reminded the world who paid for the wings. He showed us that your presence has value. And that when your dignity is questioned, you don't always need to fight for inclusion. You can choose to walk away and let the world feel what happens when you're gone. To those who've ever been overlooked, doubted, or made to feel small in rooms they helped build, you are not alone. You don't need to explain your worth to people who only see you as a risk. Your silence, your departure, your refusal to play along with a broken system, those can be your loudest, most enduring statements. And to those in positions of power, let this be your mirror. Malcolm's story isn't just a warning. It's a call to examine who you elevate, who you listen to, and who you dismiss when it no longer feels convenient. To our listeners here at U.S. Justice Story, thank you. Thank you for sitting with the discomfort. For letting the weight of this moment settle in. For recognizing that these stories, though fictional, mirror the lived experiences of many. If this story moved you, we hope you'll share it. Not for clicks, but to start conversations that matter. Conversations about equity, accountability, and what it truly means to belong. Until next time, stay aware, stay compassionate, and never underestimate the power of your silence when it carries the truth.